The flatline screamed. 3 weeks old. For pounds. Heart-stopping. And an 85-pound German Shepherd was the only one who refused to accept it. He began to bark. 1 bark per second. Exactly 60 beats per minute. The target heart rate for an infant. Like he was teaching her heart how to beat again. What happened next made every person in that room cry. Nurses who'd seen everything. Doctors who'd built walls around their emotions. Even the security guard who'd been called to remove the dog. Every single one of them broke down. But to understand why a retired military K-9 refused to leave a dying baby's side, and what he did that defied every law of medicine and nature, we need to go back. Back to the phone call that shattered everything. Back to 4:47 a.m. The phone rang in the darkness of the Cole family home. Nathan Cole knew before he answered. After 2 tours in Afghanistan, he developed a sixth sense for bad news. Some calls carry the weight of funerals before a single word is spoken. This one felt like a coffin being lowered into the ground. He reached for the phone. His wife Grace stirred beside him, but didn't wake. She'd finally fallen asleep after 3 days of crying. Mr. Cole, this is Dr. Patel from Sacred Heart Hospital. It's about Penelope. Nathan closed his eyes. His daughter. His miracle baby. The child they'd tried 7 years to conceive. Born 11 weeks premature with a heart that couldn't remember how to beat. 3 surgeries in 3 weeks. Each one a gamble. Each one buying time that was running out faster than sand through broken fingers. How long does she have? Silence on the other end. The kind of silence that speaks louder than words. Then, hours. Maybe less. We've done everything medicine allows. Her heart, it's just too weak. I'm so sorry, Mr. Cole. I'm so very sorry. Nathan hung up. His hands didn't shake. 2 tours in Afghanistan had trained that reflex out of him. He'd held dying soldiers in his arms. He'd made impossible decisions under enemy fire. He'd buried friends who were closer than brothers. But nothing had prepared him for this. Something in his chest cracked open like old wood splitting in fire. A sound escaped his throat that he didn't recognize. Half sob, half growl. Across the room, Valor lifted his head from his bed. The German Shepherd's amber eyes caught the moonlight streaming through the window. He'd been watching Nathan for 3 days now. Not the casual observation of a pet waiting for dinner or a walk. Something deeper. Something urgent. He'd been pacing at night, his nails clicking against the hardwood floors in restless circles that had no destination. Whining at the nursery door. The room decorated with pink elephants and soft blankets that would never hold the baby it was meant for. Staring at the empty crib with an intensity that made Nathan's skin prickle with something he couldn't name. Before anyone spoke the words, Valor already knew. Dogs sense things we can't explain. They smell cancer before doctors can detect it. They predict seizures minutes before they happen. They know when death is approaching long before the machine starts screaming. Valor had spent 8 years trained to detect death in its most violent form. Explosives, chemical weapons, the invisible signatures of destruction. But something in this house had triggered those same instincts. Something that told him a life was slipping away. Nathan looked at his partner. 8 years together. 17 lives saved in the mountains of Afghanistan. A bond forged in dust and blood, and the kind of trust that doesn't need words to communicate. I have to see her, Nathan said, his voice barely a whisper. One time. Before. He couldn't finish the sentence. The words stuck in his throat like shrapnel. Valor rose from his bed, crossed the room with purpose. Not the lazy amble of a retired dog, but the precise movement of a soldier who'd heard the call to action. He pressed his massive head against Nathan's thigh with a pressure that said everything words couldn't. I'm coming with you. Wherever you're going, whatever you're facing, I'm coming with you. Nathan placed his hand on Valor's head, felt the warmth of his fur, the steady rhythm of his breathing. Okay, boy, he whispered. Okay. The hospital said no. Absolutely not. The night administrator's voice was sharp enough to cut glass. A military K-9 in the NICU? Do you have any idea what kind of liability that represents? The bacteria alone. He's cleaner than half your staff, Nathan said, fighting to keep his voice level. He's had every vaccination, every health check. He's been in operating rooms overseas that would make your facilities look like a playground. That's not the point, Mr. Cole. Hospital policy clearly states, my daughter is dying. The words hung in the air between them. Raw, brutal, undeniable. The administrator, a woman in her 50s with reading glasses perched on her nose and a name tag that read, Margaret Holloway, paused. Something flickered behind her professional mask. Nathan pressed forward. She has hours left. Maybe less. I'm asking for one thing. One thing before I have to bury my 3-week-old daughter. Let her meet the dog who saved my life. Let her know, even if she can't understand it, that her father was protected by something extraordinary. He told them about Kandahar, the IED buried under a road that looked exactly like every other road they'd traveled. The convoy of 12 soldiers, young men with families waiting at home, with mothers who still sent care packages, with girlfriends who wrote letters every week. They were 10 feet from death when Valor's body language changed. A subtle shift that only Nathan recognized after years of partnership. The slight tension in his shoulders, the way his ears rotated forward, the almost imperceptible pause in his breathing. Nathan screamed for the convoy to stop. The lead vehicle slammed its brakes. The soldiers behind them cursed and shouted. Then the ground erupted. The IED detonated harmlessly in front of them, close enough to shower the vehicles with dirt and debris, but far enough to leave everyone alive. Everyone except the insurgent who'd been waiting to trigger a secondary device, and Valor, who'd taken a piece of shrapnel in his shoulder when he lunged toward the threat. 12 soldiers went home because of that dog. 12 families got to hug their sons and brothers and husbands because a German shepherd sensed death before it could claim them. The administrator's face changed as Nathan spoke. The professional mask cracked, revealing something human underneath. She picked up the phone. 20 minutes later, Nathan walked through Sacred Heart's front doors with Valor at his side. The hospital at night was a different world. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting everything in a pale, sickly glow. The smell of antiseptic hung heavy in the air, mixed with something else, something that smelled like fear and grief and desperate hope. Every head turned as they passed through the corridors. Nurses stopped mid-conversation, their eyes going wide at the sight of the massive German shepherd. A doctor with a clipboard froze against the wall. An orderly pushing a medication cart backed up, so fast he nearly tipped the whole thing over. Valor moved like he was clearing a hostile building in Kabul. Precise, alert, purposeful. His nails clicked against the linoleum in a steady, measured rhythm that echoed off the walls like a military cadence. Not a pet visiting a hospital, a soldier approaching his final mission. The NICU wing was quieter than the rest of the hospital. Hushed voices, soft beeps from monitors, the mechanical whisper of ventilators keeping tiny lungs working. Room 7. End of the corridor. Door half open. Nathan paused at the threshold. His heart slammed against his ribs hard enough to bruise. Grace sat in the corner chair. His wife. The woman who'd laughed at his terrible jokes through 2 deployments. Who'd held his hand through nightmares he couldn't describe. Who'd dreamed of this baby for 7 years of fertility treatments and failed pregnancies and hope that refused to die. She hadn't moved in hours. Her eyes were hollow, staring at nothing. Her hands lay limp in her lap like they'd forgotten how to hold anything. The coffee someone had brought her sat untouched and cold on the table beside her. She looked like someone who'd already started dying alongside her daughter. Grace. Nothing. Not even a flicker of recognition. Nathan stepped inside. Valor followed, his claws silent now on the softer flooring of the NICU room. The German shepherd had entered hundreds of rooms searching for explosives during his career. His approach was always the same. Systematic grid patterns, controlled breathing, scent analysis of every surface and shadow. But when he crossed the threshold into room 7, everything changed. Valor stopped. Every muscle in his body locked rigid. His head swiveled toward the bassinet in the center of the room like it was pulled by an invisible force, a magnetic attraction that defied explanation. Inside that bassinet, connected to tubes and wires and monitors that counted down her fading life in cold digital numbers, lay Penelope Cole. 3 weeks old. For pounds, 6 ounces. A fighter from the moment she entered this world, too early, too small, too fragile. Fighting a battle she was losing. The German shepherd moved toward her like he was approaching sacred ground. Slow, reverent, each step placed with the care of a soldier walking through a minefield, aware that one wrong movement could shatter everything. And then he made a sound. Not a bark, not a whine. Something between a hum and a moan. A frequency that seemed to vibrate through the floor and into the walls. A sound that Nathan had never heard in 8 years of partnership. a sound that made Grace Cole look up for the first time in 12 hours. "I see you. I'm here. You're not alone." Valor had spent 8 years trained to detect death. Explosives, chemical signatures, the invisible markers of destruction that human senses couldn't perceive. His nose could identify compounds at parts per trillion, a sensitivity that bordered on supernatural. But what he sensed coming from that bassinet wasn't dying. It was fighting. The tiny heartbeat was irregular, stumbling over itself like a runner with a broken leg, struggling to find a rhythm that kept slipping away. But stubborn, so impossibly stubborn, like a soldier refusing to surrender, even when the battle was already lost. Valor pressed closer to the bassinet. His wet nose hovered inches from the infant, taking in her scent, milk and medicine, and something else, something that smelled like struggle and determination and life clinging to existence with everything it had. And something shifted in his body, a stillness that Nathan had never seen in 8 years of partnership. The kind of stillness that came over Valor only when he'd found something critical, something that demanded every ounce of his focus and training. His breathing slowed, matched hers exactly. Rise and fall, as if he was teaching her lungs how to work, as if he was showing her body how to keep going. Something was happening in that room that Nathan couldn't explain, something that made the hair on his arms stand straight up and sent shivers down his spine despite the warmth of the hospital. If you've ever witnessed a dog sense something humans couldn't, stay with this story. What Valor does next will challenge everything you believe about the bond between animals and the people they love. The charge nurse appeared in the doorway within minutes. Her name tag read Patricia, and her face was tight with professional concern that bordered on alarm. "Sir, the dog needs to maintain a 6-foot distance from the patient. Hospital protocol. I'm sure you understand." Nathan nodded. Valor back. Clear command. Firm tone. The exact voice that had guided Valor through minefields and hostile territory for 8 years. The voice that men obey without question. The German shepherd didn't move. Not a muscle. Not an inch. Nathan felt his stomach drop through the floor. "Valor. Heel." Nothing. His amber eyes stayed locked on Penelope with an intensity that bordered on hypnotic. His body was rigid, frozen in detection posture. The same stance he'd used for IEDs and chemical weapons and every other threat he'd been trained to identify. But this wasn't a bomb alert. When Valor found explosives, he signaled and retreated. That was the training. That was the protocol drilled into him through thousands of repetitions over years of service. This was different. He was signaling something and refusing to leave it. In 8 years of military service, Valor had never disobeyed a direct command. Never. Not once. His discipline was legendary among the K9 units. His obedience was the reason 17 soldiers had gone home to their families instead of coming home in flag-draped coffins. But when Nathan ordered him to heal, Valor turned his head just enough to meet his handler's eyes. The look said everything words couldn't. Not this time. Not her. "I'm not leaving." The nurse reached for the phone on the wall, ready to call security. Then Valor did something that made her hand freeze in midair. He pressed his forehead against the edge of the bassinet. Gently, carefully, like he understood exactly how fragile the infant inside was. Like he knew that one wrong movement, one moment of carelessness, could shatter her completely. And he began to breathe. In, out, in, out. Perfect rhythm, steady as a metronome, consistent as a heartbeat, matching, exactly matching, the struggling rise and fall of Penelope's tiny chest, as if he was teaching her lungs how to work, as if he was showing her heart how to beat. The nurse's hand dropped from the phone. Grace rose from her chair, the first movement she'd made in 12 hours. She moved like someone waking from a nightmare, uncertain whether the world around her was real or just another cruel dream. "What is he doing?" she whispered, her voice cracked and raw from crying. Nathan had no answer. In 8 years of bombs and bullets and horrors, he'd never speak aloud. He had never seen Valor behave like this. But the heart monitor did have an answer. The erratic spikes on the screen were smoothing out. The chaos was finding pattern. Not healthy. Not yet. But stable in a way it hadn't been since the last surgery failed 3 days ago. Was Penelope's struggling heart listening to the German shepherd beside her? Was she trying to match his rhythm? The hospital administrator arrived 17 minutes later. Margaret Holloway had clearly been pulled from something important. Her reading glasses were askew, and there was a coffee stain on her sleeve that she hadn't noticed. 22 years in healthcare administration had taught her to tolerate nothing that threatened her hospital's liability insurance. This animal needs to be removed. Immediately. Nathan stepped between her and Valor. Look at the monitor. I don't need to look at anything. I need that dog out of my NICU before something goes wrong, and I spend the next 5 years in litigation. Grace's voice cut through the standoff. Quiet, cracked, but present for the first time since the diagnosis. Look at the monitor. Something in her tone made Margaret Holloway stop. Turn. Look. The cardiac monitor beside Penelope's bassinet was doing something it hadn't done in 72 hours. Stabilizing. The erratic spikes that had characterized her heart rhythm since birth were smoothing into something that almost resembled a pattern. The numbers that had been falling for days were holding steady. Some were even climbing. That's coincidence, Margaret said. But her voice had lost its sharp edge. Correlation doesn't imply causation. Any first-year medical student knows that. Dr. Patel had arrived during the confrontation. He stepped forward now, stethoscope in hand, and began checking Penelope's vitals manually. His brow furrowed as he worked. Her oxygen saturation is up 2%, he said quietly, almost to himself. Heart rate is more consistent than it's been in days. Blood pressure is stabilizing. He looked at the dog, at the way Valor's breathing matched the infant's, at the impossible calm that had settled over room 7. I don't understand it, he admitted, but I'm not going to argue with results. 1 hour, Nathan said, seizing the moment. Give us 1 hour. If anything worsens, anything at all, I'll remove him myself. You have my word as a soldier. The administrator looked at the monitors, at the dog, at the parents whose entire world was ending in this sterile room. 1 hour, she finally said. If that animal causes any disruption, any at all, he's out permanently, and you're banned from this hospital for life. She left without waiting for a response. Nathan exhaled a breath he didn't know he'd been holding, looked at his wife, at his partner, at his daughter. 1 hour to prove that whatever was happening in this room was real. Valor hadn't moved. His breathing remained steady as a heartbeat, his focus absolute, and Penelope's numbers continued their slow, impossible climb. The hour became 2, then 3, then 4. No one asked Valor to leave. The nurses who'd wanted him removed now moved around him with quiet respect, adjusting their paths to avoid disturbing his vigil. They'd watched the numbers climb, documented changes that defied everything their training told them was possible. Word spread through the hospital in whispers. The night shift told the morning shift. The morning shift told anyone who would listen. By hour 3, nurses from pediatrics, oncology, even the emergency department were finding excuses to walk past room 7, to peek through the window, to witness the German shepherd who wouldn't leave a dying baby's side. Valor refused food when a sympathetic nurse offered it, refused water, refused the soft bed someone brought from the pediatric wing. His focus was absolute, his position unchanged. 4 hours of standing guard without a single break. His legs must have been screaming, his joints aching, his body exhausted from the constant tension of vigilance. But when a nurse tried to coax him away with premium treats, the expensive kind that usually made him break any command, the German shepherd turned his head just long enough to give her one look. I'm working. Don't interrupt. Then his amber eyes returned to Penelope. Nathan sat beside Grace for the first time in days. Their fingers intertwined. Her hand was cold, but it was holding his. That was something. That was everything. Tell me about him, she whispered. Tell me about Valor. So Nathan did. He told her about the day they met. A young handler fresh out of training, and a young dog with too much energy and not enough discipline. Both desperate to prove themselves. Both terrified of failing. He told her about the months of training, the bond that formed through sweat and repetition, and the slow building of trust that couldn't be rushed. The moment when Valor stopped being an assignment and became a partner. He told her about Afghanistan, the heat that could melt steel, the dust that got into everything, the constant tension of knowing that death could be hiding under any rock, behind any wall, inside any vehicle. He told her about the soldiers Valor had saved, young men barely old enough to vote, sent to fight a war they didn't fully understand. Valor had protected them all, had given them a chance to grow old, to have families, to live the lives they deserved. He saved me, Nathan said, his voice thick with emotion. Saved all of us. And when that shrapnel tore through his shoulder, he didn't whimper, didn't cry, just looked at me with those amber eyes like he was apologizing for not being faster. Grace wiped tears from her cheeks, looked at the German shepherd standing vigil over her daughter. He's not going to let her go, is he? No, Nathan said. He's not. At 3:47 a.m., something happened that made everyone in the room stop breathing. Penelope's tiny hand, the one that had been limp and motionless since birth, moved. Her fingers, smaller than Valor's teeth, reached toward the warmth radiating from his fur. And for the first time in 3 weeks of life, the dying baby gripped something with intention. Valor felt the touch. It was lighter than a butterfly landing, barely more than a whisper of pressure against his fur, so faint that a human might not have noticed it at all. But it sent electricity through his entire body. Every nerve ending fired at once. Every instinct screamed that something profound was happening. This was why he stayed. This was what he was guarding. Not death. Life. Fragile. Stubborn. Fighting life that refused to surrender. He pressed his nose gently against her tiny fingers, breathed warmth onto her paper-thin skin, made a sound deep in his chest. Not quite a growl, not quite a purr. Something ancient. Something that predated training and commands and everything humans thought they understood about dogs. A promise. I'm here. I'm not leaving. Keep fighting. I'll fight with you. Grace's hand flew to her mouth. Tears streamed down her face in rivers she couldn't stop. She's never done that, she whispered, her voice breaking. In 3 weeks. Never reached for anything. Never held anything. Never. She couldn't finish. The sobs took over. Nathan felt his own eyes burning. His daughter, his partner, connected across the impossible distance between species in a way that defied everything he understood about the world. This is the kind of moment that reminds us why dogs aren't just pets. They sense things we can't explain. They love in ways we don't deserve. They fight for us, even when we've given up on ourselves. If this story is touching your heart, take 1 second to subscribe. It helps us share more stories about bonds that defy explanation. Dawn broke over Sacred Heart Hospital. Pink and gold light filtered through the window of room 7, painting the monitors in warm colors that seemed wrong for a place that had held so much fear. The machines beeped their steady rhythm, steadier than they'd been in weeks. Valor remained at his post, unmoved through the entire long night. For 6 hours, Penelope had been stable. More than stable. Improving. The night shift nurses had documented everything with shaking hands. Oxygen saturation climbing steadily. Heart rate finding a rhythm. Vital signs moving in the right direction for the first time since her last surgery. Dr. Patel arrived at 6:15 a.m., earlier than his shift required. He'd heard the whispers, reviewed the overnight charts 3 times before believing them. Now he examined Penelope with careful hands and a furrowed brow. I don't understand it, he admitted quietly, shaking his head. 23 years of medicine, and I don't understand what I'm seeing. But I won't argue with results. Nathan allowed himself to hope. Really hope. For the first time since that 4:47 a.m. phone call shattered his world. Then, at 6:47 a.m., everything shattered again. The cardiac monitor screamed. Not the steady beeping of a stable heart. Not the gentle rhythm they'd been watching all night. The shrieking, wailing alarm of a system in catastrophic failure. The sound that haunted every parent who'd ever stood in a room like this. Penelope's tiny body went rigid. Her color shifted from pink to gray in seconds, like watching a flower wilt in fast forward. The numbers on every monitor plummeted like stones dropped from a cliff. Crash cart, Dr. Patel shouted, his calm evaporating. Get the crash cart now. Nurses flooded into room 7. Equipment materialized from everywhere. Hands reached for the bassinet, pushing past Valor, shoving him aside. Get that dog out. Nathan grabbed Valor's collar with both hands. Come, boy. We have to go. We have to let them work. For the first time in 8 years, Valor fought him. The German shepherd planted his feet against the tile floor, strained against the collar hard enough to choke himself. His eyes never left Penelope, not for a single second. Valor heal. Nothing. 85 pounds of muscle and determination, and absolute refusal to abandon his post. A nurse grabbed Nathan's arm, her fingers digging in hard enough to bruise. "Sir, if you don't remove that animal right now, security will. And they won't be gentle about it." Nathan faced an impossible choice. Trust his training, follow orders, remove the dog, let the professionals work. That's what a soldier did. That's what discipline demanded. Or trust his partner, the dog who'd never been wrong. Not once in 8 years. The dog whose instincts had saved 17 lives. Grace screamed from the corner, where another nurse was holding her back. "What's happening? What's happening to my baby?" The flatline tone cut through everything. A single, continuous note that meant one thing and one thing only. Penelope's heart had stopped. The crash team surrounded the bassinet. Tiny chest compressions on an infant no bigger than a loaf of bread. Medications pushed through 4 lines too small to see. Desperate measures for a desperate situation that was slipping away with every passing second. And Valor was howling. A sound no one in that room had ever heard a dog make. Not a bark. Not a whine. Something primal. Something ancient. Something that reached back through 10,000 years of evolution to a time when dogs and humans first learned to grieve together. The sound of a warrior watching a battle slip away. "Get that animal out now." Nathan dragged Valor toward the door with every ounce of strength he possessed. The German Shepherd went completely limp. Dead weight. 85 pounds of absolute, immovable refusal. He would not leave. He would not abandon her. He would die on this floor before he walked away from that baby. Nathan made his choice. He released the collar. "Sir, what are you?" "He's never been wrong," Nathan said, his voice steady despite the chaos around him. "Not once in 8 years. Not once." Valor didn't run to the bassinet. He planted himself 3 feet away, close enough to see, far enough not to interfere, and began a bark. Not aggressive. Not panicked. Not the frantic barking of a stressed animal. Rhythmic. Steady. 1 bark per second. Precise as a military cadence. Like a metronome. Like a heartbeat. Like he was showing Penelope's heart how to find its rhythm again. The crash team paused. Every person in the room turned to stare at the dog. 1 bark per second. Exactly 60 beats per minute. The target heart rate for an infant. Dr. Patel looked at the monitor. At the dog. Back at the monitor. His hands frozen over Penelope's tiny chest. Valor's barks weren't noise. They were commands. Beat. 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 Come back. Beat. 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 I'm still here. Beat. 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 Fight. The cardiac monitor flickered. Beeped. Then settled into a rhythm that matched, exactly matched, the tempo of Valor's barks. Dr. Patel pressed his stethoscope to Penelope's chest. His face shifted from concentration to confusion to something that looked like a man watching a miracle unfold before his eyes. "Her heart is beating stronger." The words hung in the air like a prayer answered. Beat, beat, beat. Penelope's color returned. Pink spreading across gray like dawn breaking over a battlefield after the longest night. Beat, beat, beat. Her chest rose. Fell. Rose again. Breathing on her own. Beat, beat, beat. "I can't explain what just happened," Dr. Patel whispered, stepping back from the bassinet. 23 years of medicine. Thousands of patients. I've never seen anything like this. I don't have words for what I just witnessed. The room went silent except for Valor's steady barking. And then, slowly, the barking stopped. Valor walked to the bassinet. Slowly, deliberately, each step measured and purposeful, like a soldier returning to his post after the battle was won. He lay down on the cold hospital floor beside the bassinet, positioned his head exactly where Penelope could feel his warmth, where his breathing could reach her tiny body, where his heartbeat could remind hers how to keep going. He wasn't leaving. Not ever. Grace fell to her knees beside the German Shepherd who had refused to let her daughter die. She wrapped her arms around his thick neck, buried her face in his fur, and sobbed. 3 weeks of grief and fear and desperate hope finally breaking free like a dam bursting. Valor pressed his body against hers, let her cry into his fur for as long as she needed, made soft sounds in his throat that seemed to say, "It's okay. She's okay. I've got her. I've always got her." Nathan knelt beside them, his hand on his wife's shaking back, his other hand buried in his partner's fur. His family, broken and healing, somehow impossibly still together. The nurses stood back in a silent semicircle. Several were crying openly. One had her hand pressed over her heart like she was trying to hold it inside her chest. What Valor did in that room, refusing to give up when medicine had nothing left to offer, is the kind of story that restores faith in the world. The kind of story that reminds us why we keep fighting even when everything seems lost. If this moved you, subscribe now. Not for me. For dogs like Valor whose stories deserve to be told, whose love deserves to be witnessed. 3 months later, Penelope Cole came home. The doctors called it remarkable recovery. That's the phrase they use when science has no explanation and they don't want to admit that something happened beyond their understanding. The nurses called it unexplained, whispered it to each other in break rooms and hallways, still not quite believing what they'd witnessed in room 7. Grace and Nathan called it something simpler. Valor. The German Shepherd had visited every single day for 93 days straight. Rain or shine, holidays and weekends. The hospital rewrote its policies for him, made an exception that became a new rule. One retired canine had proven that some bonds transcend protocol. Penelope responded to Valor like she responded to no one else in the world. When doctors approached with cold stethoscopes, she cried. When nurses changed her bandages with gentle hands, she wailed. When specialists ran their tests and checked their charts, she screamed until her face turned red. But when Valor walked into her room, she went still, calm, focused. Her eyes would find him the moment he appeared in the doorway, track his every movement as he crossed the room, wait for him to take his position beside her bed. And when he did, her vital signs improved. Every single time, without fail. The pediatric cardiologist called it unprecedented patient response to animal presence, wrote it up for a medical journal that would puzzle over it for years. Grace called it what it was. Love. Now, in the nursery that was supposed to stay empty forever, Penelope slept in her crib. The monitors were gone. The tubes were gone. The machines that had measured her fading life in cold digital numbers had been replaced by a simple baby monitor and a nightlight shaped like a star. And Valor. Every night, without fail, the German Shepherd slept beside her crib. Not because he was commanded to, not because he was trained to, not because anyone asked him to, because 8 years of detecting death had taught him something the military never intended. How to recognize life worth protecting. Nathan stood in the doorway at 2 a.m., watching his partner and his daughter in the soft glow of the star-shaped light. Valor's graying head rested near the crib's edge. His ears rotated at every small sound Penelope made, every sigh, every shift, every tiny murmur in her sleep. His breathing had synchronized with hers, the same rhythm he'd taught her that first night in room 7. You saved her, Nathan whispered into the darkness. You saved all of us. Valor's tail thumped once against the carpet. Acknowledgement without breaking focus. He was still working, still guarding, still protecting. This was his mission now. Not bombs, not battlefields, not the invisible signatures of death. Her. Penelope stirred in her sleep, made a soft sound. Her tiny hand reached through the crib's bars toward the warmth she'd learned to trust. Valor lifted his head, pressed his nose against her fingers, breathed warmth onto her skin. The baby settled, smiled in her sleep. Her hand wrapped around his muzzle with a grip that had grown stronger every day. And the German Shepherd who'd spent 8 years finding death had finally found something worth living for. Margaret Holloway, the administrator who'd wanted him removed, visited the Cole house 3 weeks after Penelope came home. She stood in the nursery doorway, watching Valor keep his vigil. I was wrong, she said quietly, her voice thick with emotion. I've spent 22 years following policies and procedures. 22 years believing that rules exist for good reasons. And they do. But sometimes, she paused, wiping her eyes. Sometimes something comes along that's bigger than policy. I've never been more glad to be wrong about anything in my entire life. She left a donation to the K-9 Veterans Fund and a handwritten note that simply said, "Thank you for teaching me that some things matter more than protocol." 5 years later, a little girl with dark curls runs through a backyard, laughing, the sound of pure joy, the kind that only children can make. Beside her, a German Shepherd with gray around his muzzle runs too, slower now than he used to be. His joints ache on cold mornings. His eyes aren't as sharp as they once were, but he's never far behind her, never more than a few steps away. She falls, scrapes her knee on the rough grass, starts to cry, The sudden, shocked tears of a child who didn't expect the world to hurt. Before her parents can even rise from their chairs on the patio, Valor is there, pressing his body against hers, licking her tears with a tongue that's gentler than any bandage, making that sound, the one between a hum and a moan. The same sound he made that first night in room 7. I'm here. You're okay. I've got you. Penelope wraps her arms around his neck, buries her face in his fur, and the dog who refused to let her die holds her the same way he did when she was 3 weeks old and fighting for every heartbeat. 2 more years pass. Valor is 12 now, ancient for a German shepherd. His muzzle is completely white. His steps are slower, more deliberate. His joints ache constantly, though he never complains. But every night, without fail, he still sleeps beside Penelope's bed, still checks on her every few hours, pressing his ear against the mattress to hear her breathing, still guards her with everything he has left. One morning, Penelope wakes up and Valor doesn't. He passed in his sleep, peacefully, beside her bed, exactly where he'd been every night for 7 years. The 7-year-old doesn't fully understand death. She's too young to grasp the permanence of it, the finality. But she understands something else, something more important. She climbs out of bed, lies down on the floor beside him, wraps her arms around his neck one last time. Thank you for not leaving, she whispers into his fur, her tears soaking into the gray and white coat she's known her whole life. Thank you for teaching my heart how to beat. She stays there for a long time, holding him, remembering. Nathan finds him like that an hour later. His daughter, his partner, together at the end, just like they were at the beginning. He doesn't move them, doesn't say anything, just sits down on the floor beside them and places one hand on his daughter's back and one hand on his partner's fur. His family, complete in a way he never expected, broken in a way he always feared, but together, even now, together. Science says dogs can't understand mortality, that their brains don't process human medicine, human grief, human hope. That what happened in room 7 was coincidence or stress response or some biological mechanism we haven't discovered yet. But Valor knew something that night, something no study has ever measured, something no training ever taught, something that exists in the space between heartbeats where science can't reach. He knew that Penelope wasn't ready to leave, and he refused to let her go until she was ready to stay. Some call it instinct, some call it coincidence, some call it a statistical anomaly that will never be replicated. The Cole family calls it love, and maybe, just maybe, that's the only explanation that matters. If Valor's story touched your heart, share it with someone who needs to believe in miracles today, someone who's fighting a battle that feels impossible, someone who's been told there's no hope left, someone who needs to know that sometimes, help comes from the places we least expect, that love shows up in forms we don't recognize, that the universe sends us exactly what we need, exactly when we need it. Subscribe if you haven't. We find these stories so you never forget. The bond between a dog and their human is the closest thing to magic this world has ever known. Comment, Valor, if you believe dogs can sense things we can't explain. And tell me, have you ever witnessed a dog do something that defied every explanation? Something that made you question everything you thought you knew about animals and love and the mysteries of this world? I want to hear your story, because every story like this reminds us of something we too often forget. Love doesn't need words. It doesn't need explanations. It doesn't need science to validate it. It just needs a heartbeat willing to fight for another. And sometimes that heartbeat belongs to a dog.
Thank you for watching this story to the end. If you enjoyed this story, you will surely love the next one. It's as crazier and more intriguing as you can ever imagine. So do check it out. Click on the image showing on your screen right now to watch the next one.